Okay, let's get right into it. This is my second knife, and I'm starting out with a 1 inch 1095 bar stock. So my first experiment was with a 80 CRV2, and then the first knife I actually finished was 52-100. And so far, it seems a lot easier to work with the 1095. So probably going to make a few more of these before I go back and try other steels. So I'm just going to start shaping this, and I have this new diagonal peen hammer that's in the top there. That's just going to help put grooves in and make it easier to flatten out. And this one was a real challenge with the tongs situation. I have 4 tongs, and I basically use these tongs for almost everything. I did try welding rebar onto the first like experiment one, and that didn't really work out too well. I think I need to flatten the rebar to get a better face to weld it, because I would just keep bending the rebar off of the blade stock. So, and then I have some tongs that are 4 bar stock, but they only go down to 1.5 inches, so they're too big for this one. So you actually have to hold this with a lot of pressure. I really need some box tongs maybe, or some smaller bar stock tongs. I don't know. I'll survive. Make my forearm muscles stronger in my left arm, I guess. Yeah, then I did just drop it. I dropped it several times, like getting used to how I'm holding it. It takes a lot of pressure, but I'm basically just like shaping out what I want the blade to look like, and kind of figuring out as I go. I mean, I've done a lot more mild steel stuff than tool steel, which is certainly harder to work with. But like I said, I had a lot of luck with this, so I think I'm gonna buy some more 1095 and see how that goes. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the shape here, and I'm just letting it cool down in the forge so it cools down slowly, and then just comparing it to my plans, and then cutting off the extra metal here. I'm going to start shaping the tang, which I'm using my bigger 3 pound hammer for this, and I did not cut off the right amount at all. I end up knocking this thing down and cutting it off 3 more times, I think. So maybe on the next hidden tang knife. I mean, this is the first hidden tang knife I made. The first one was a full tang. So first time doing this, figured out new things, but I did spend a lot of time hammering down this. I could have just got out the angle grinder and cut off most of the excess, but what's the fun in that? I don't want to be a stock removal knife maker. I want to be a bladesmith, blacksmith knife maker. So I want to figure out the right method to do this, and it's a lot of time here. I probably spent 2 or 3 hour sessions just shaping the tank. Whatever, it's all good fun. All right, after getting the basic shape of the tang, I decide I'm gonna work on the bevel shape on the knife a little bit more. Don't really have a good ricasso built in. I'm planning on just fixing that on the grinder. I don't really have a square hammer. I don't have the right hammer to do the ricasso well, I don't think. I mean, I've done a few experiments and tried, and it doesn't work out exactly the way I wanted to. So until I get a better hammer, I'm just going to fix that on the bench grinder or something. I mean, that's what I did here. So a little bit of fine tuning on the blade, getting it, make sure it's true and straight, and the shape is about what I want. And then I'm going to do a little profiling on the belt grinder to get the, the shape right. On to working on the bolster. So I have this brass bar stock to work on that I'm just gonna clean up a little bit before starting on and cutting it down with the chop saw. It's also gonna have a little quarter radius relief on the blade side, so I used the bench grinder to just kind of angle it down so I could start to file it, and that's what it looks like starting out. Looks pretty close, and then filing is super tedious, but whatever. I got a basic shape, and then I'm drilling some holes to be able to file the center so that it slides onto the tang. And yes, having lots of problems with the drill there. And I don't actually own any files small enough to fit in there, so I had to run over to Harbor Freight and buy this $7 set of little diamond files that actually work really good. So after lots of filing and some more grinding on the tang to get the shape right, make sure it's angled down so that everything slides on there and is snug. I'm going to start working on getting the bevels in on the knife, and I'm using this piece of wood that I cut at a 7-degree angle on the miter saw. I saw different angles to use. I'm not sure exactly what's right, but I saw a few other YouTube videos of people using this kind of like angled block that they cut, and this actually works really well. I got the bevels in on this knife a lot better than the first one, which was just a lot of trial and error and me holding it at different angles. I mean, of course, people use really expensive and nice jigs on real belt grinders, but my cheap little belt grinder, I'll do what I can. And so it's starting to come along. There's a little curve in there. I ended up putting it back in the forge and straightening it a little bit and grinding it some more that I don't have footage of, but it's getting pretty close there, and the bevels on the knife look good. And then I don't have much footage of the filing, which is pretty dull anyways, but it's pretty close. The file's not quite right, so I ended up buying this really cheap file guide. Doesn't have a carbide edge, so I'm probably only going to be able to use it so many times before replacing it, but it was super cheap, and the carbide edge ones are really expensive. They're like 150 bucks, so I'll ruin a couple of those cheap ones before I invest in one of those. But after some refinement, I think the fit is pretty good. And what am I doing here? I'm going to go back to cleaning up the profile just a little bit more again. I'm going to start working on the handle. This is not going to go well at first. I'm going to go right through in one pass and break it right there at the end. So after comparing it to my original model, it seems like it's going to be just big enough even after I broke it. So I'm going to go ahead and drill the pinhole on the other side, and this time be a lot slower and feed the drill in and out. I was really worried I was going to crack the block drilling much bigger holes I needed for the tang to fit, but obviously there's some grain in the acrylic handles that I got from Chance that I just have to be careful with the pinholes and not so much the other one. At least that's what it seemed, because I didn't have any problems anymore after breaking it the first time. Feel pretty uneasy just holding it there, but I don't really have any clamping solution for that. And then I did some hand drilling while I was in the vise to get the fit right, and it kind of lines up and everything works. So now I'm going to actually drill through the tang, and I was expecting my inexpensive drill press to have problems with this, but it actually went through it pretty easily. I did buy some new drill bits recently that worked out better, and then just using a little round diamond tip file part of my new little set to clean that up and make sure that the mosaic pin slides through easily, which it now does. And then test fitting everything. Everything looks pretty good, pretty happy with that. All right, time to set up the new quench tank. Putting 5 gallons of canola oil in this Army ammo can that I got, and then I'm just heating up rebar to get the oil up to temperature. This is the first time I've done this. It's supposed to be at 120 degrees, so while I'm like thermal cycling the blades, I'm heating it up and letting it cool down. I'm heating up rebar at the same time and sticking it into the oil and stirring it. I would only get about 5 degrees of temperature rise per rebar, so I ended up putting 2 sticks of rebar in the forge, and I'm alternating putting them in there and thermal cycling the blade, which I ended up doing twice, and I get the temperature up to 120, so it's time to harden. And I actually put my big welding glove on, hoping for a big fireball, but no such luck. I think it was hot enough, and it turned out good. I grabbed the file and did hardness check, and it seemed plenty hard, so like I did my first oil quench correctly. So I ended up clamping it between some angle iron and letting it cool for a while. I'm not sure if I really needed that step. And then I'm gonna put it in the toaster oven at 400 degrees to temper it for 90 minutes. And I definitely didn't need the aluminum foil in there that it kind of stuck to. I should just put a fire brick in there. And then I'm gonna do some more cleanup on the belt grinder. And I think I'm using like 80 grit here, so still pretty heavy stock removal belt. Yeah, and then it's time to epoxy everything together. And no, I didn't tell Alyssa I stole some of her chopsticks to use for epoxy. I probably have better things to use, but I'm too lazy to go find them in the garage. And it feels weird doing this one after the full tang, where after you epoxy, you clamp everything together, and there's nothing really to clamp together. If it fits, it fits. So got everything in there and just let it cure overnight. And then moving on to starting to shape the handle. And you notice I got the ventilator on and the face screen on, and you can see just the cloud of pink dust that this generates. I mean, it is some seriously messy work. So I need to manage what clothes I'm wearing in the shop working on handles, because it's just everywhere. And then even cleaning up, I'm wearing the ventilator sweeping. I don't have any ventilation system or anything, but the shop is open air on one end, and as long as I'm wearing the safety equipment, I think I'll be fine. It's pretty hilarious how my black hoodie becomes like just covered in pink after this. And I was going to put this like big finger groove in, but the handle's really not big enough to support it. So after the first pass, I decided I'm just going to knock that off and just have a little bit of a fatter spot there. And you notice I use the top of this belt grinder a lot for shapes. It's really the only radius I have for the belt grinder. I don't have any fancy attachments or anything, so I'm just doing the best I can with what I have to work with at the point, and it works pretty good. And I'm still refining the bevels on the knife some more. I spent, I don't know, a fair amount of time going back and forth and making sure that the bevels were even and looked a lot better than the first pass. And then after doing several different grits on the belt grinder, I do when I start at 320 down to 400, 800, and then 1,000, and then 3,000. So lots of different sanding. And I actually sand one side of the knife all the way down to try and polish it with some of this new polish that I have. and it's not exactly what I wanted. I didn't actually get all the grinds out. It just kind of showed the imperfections really well. And also the handles still had a fair number of scratches. So this is this new polishing material I got from Combat Abrasives, this Maverick stuff. And why I'm using the drill instead of my Dremel that's in a box 10 feet away is beyond me. I will fix that later, but it's obviously going too slow and the torque is kicking back a lot. It's probably way more dangerous than it should be. So you can see all the white scratches in the handle. I'm not sure where I missed or what part of the sanding process introduced those. Probably not doing enough in like the 300 to 800 range, because I spent a lot more time with those grits on the second pass and I wasn't happy with the polish on that one side. So I go back to the belt grinder and redo them at 120, and then I shape the handle some more because it wasn't quite what I wanted. So you see all these like clean scratch marks that I then have to go back and clean up by hand. And I spent probably, I don't know, at least 2 hours, maybe even 2.5 hours, using different grits to try and figure out which ones I'm not cleaning up the scratches on enough. And I really spent a lot more time at 400 and especially 800. Like 400 would still put in little scratches, but if they were too deep, the 800 couldn't get them out. And then back to polishing, I finally got out the Dremel and I'm polishing up the brass. As I was sanding the handle, I noticed that the corners of the brass polished up really nicely with the grit I was using, but the flats weren't. So I went back and spent a lot of time on that. And then putting in the final bevels on the bench grinder on the fine stone, and that worked out pretty well. I'm still not entirely sure that I'm putting in the right angles, but the blade eventually sharpened up pretty nicely on the whetstone. I think I'm going to do a little bit more aggressive bevels on the next knife, but overall pretty happy with the end result. And you notice I got my little bucket of water because I did overheat the blade on the belt grinder and had to reshape it. So the shape of the blade's not exactly what I planned on starting out, but I'm pretty happy with the final result. Pin looks really nice, and the handle's really pretty. I mean, it's pretty impressive for a $10 block of fancy acrylic from Jantz. So that's the second knife. Pretty happy with the result. We'll see what happens on the third one.